7. The lush, dripping, pungent growth hung silent and threatening in the still air. Each step by the members of the patrol sank deeply into the ground, leaving indentations that slowly filled with dark water. It was like moving in a soundproof room. Beyond their limited field of vision came soft, plopping sounds like the sound of fat, gray-green slugs dropping onto a wet sponge. Jotohai Andy Holland, the point of the patrol, made herself stop thinking about what might be making the sound so she could deal with what she could see. Behind her, she felt rather than saw the other members of the patrol. Directly behind her was Gunso Emerdine Knight, the section and patrol leader. Behind him was Go Cho Swollen Horg. Holland was the lowest ranking member of the patrol, but that was not what had made her the point. All three rotated through the position, each one taking the duty for no more than 20 minutes at a time. Being lead was an exhausting business, and no one could stand the strain for too long. As fatigue began to take over, Holland began to hear and see things that weren't there. More important, she began to not see and not hear things that were. The three members of the section had been on many patrols before, but this one was different. Most patrols operated in relation to a known enemy. Even if they didn't know where the enemy was, they usually knew what they might have to face, and it was real. This time, however, they didn't know what was out there. The whole team had been trained for possible alien contact, especially for this mission, but the specter of having to face the real thing raised the tension level to the point where no one could take the lead for very long. Holland had been on point for almost her full term. She knew she was getting tired. She raised her hand to halt the patrol while she sank into a kneeling position. She used the muzzle of her Nakajama laser rifle to part the foliage at the level of her face. With a range of visibility a mere 2 meters or less, Holland wondered why she was armed with a weapon that was effective against human targets at 300 meters. Here in the thick woods, she would have preferred a slug-throwing cone rifle, or even one of the pistols carried by the mercenary patrol. That there was a mercenary patrol in the woods was both surprising and obvious. It was surprising because Holland had heard the argument between Shosa Takuda and Garber Vost over whether to send out a mercenary patrol at all. When the Shosa had suggested that the mercenaries go out, Vost simply ignored him. When the desk commander ordered the mercenaries to go on patrol, Vost had immediately responded with a heated protest. From what Holland had heard, it was not so much that Vost didn't want his people to go, it was just that he didn't want to be told they had to go. That, to Holland, seemed like an infantile attitude. She understood the necessity for order and respect. People did what they were told to do, especially when they had a leader of the Shosa's rank and stature. Trying to turn a group of mech pilots and technicians into a reconnaissance patrol was another matter. Even though they were filling out a necessary slot in the patrol scheme, Holland thought their chances of finding anything that didn't want to be found were virtually zero. They couldn't keep their mouths shut, constantly shouting to each other as they thrashed through the foliage. 2 days ago, Takuda had had to send Night Section back into the forest to extricate 3 mercenary technicians from a deep pit. The trio had stood at the bottom of the pit, howling like banshees and firing their slug pistols into the air to attract attention. That they could have used half that energy to climb out of the pit was not worth pointing out. If nothing else, the mercenaries provided the desk members with endless stories and amusement. Holland could hear them now, howling in pain, or surprise, or just to keep themselves amused. The muzzle of her rifle parted the foliage. 2 glowing red circles stared back at her from the opaque greenness beyond. She froze. The unblinking red circles stared back. They were a full 20 centimeters apart, and the face they were attached to must have been huge. Holland had a great imagination, quite possibly more than she needed, and the thought of the beast beyond filled her with both curiosity and dread, but mostly curiosity. The red eyes moved, quite possibly closer. Curiosity ended. Holland pulled the trigger, and the power pack over the breech vibrated slightly as power poured through the crystals. There was a brilliant flash of light and steam as the unseen shaft of laser light struck something wet and solid. The red eyes fled in opposite directions like frantic rockets. Holland leaped back on her heels and sat down heavily in the soft ground. She was up in an instant, thrusting the barrel into the foliage. Inside the dark cave beyond her position, she could see the dissipating steam and the soft glow of burning leaves. There was nothing else. Whatever had been there was gone now. Holland felt slightly foolish and a little frustrated. She hadn't meant to shoot at it, had done so purely out of reflex. She sank to a crouch. There, in front of her, almost beneath her own foot, was a print. The print of a giant bird. It was like so many she had seen, like so many seen by other members of her patrol and the rest, that she hardly paid more than passing interest. But then she looked again. The print was absolutely fresh. There was hardly a drop of water in the bottom, and the sides of the depression were crisp and clean. Whatever had made the print had been there just moments ago. Holland motioned Knight to her side and silently pointed to the track. Knight waved his hand, and the patrol crept cautiously forward. Horg, the trailing member of the group, remained hunkered down facing the rear. Every muscle tense, her eyes straining to pierce the foliated darkness, her ears discriminating among all the sounds in the forest, Holland moved with glacial slowness. Everything seemed strange and forbidding. Not knowing whether it was menace or hospitality to the front of her, it paid to be careful. Another track, and another, and another, each as fresh or fresher than the last. She rose to move, her eyes searching far ahead, but she got no further. Knight's hand came down firmly on her shoulder, rendering her motionless. He pulled back gently, replacing her foot in its previous track. Knight had been watching the ground rather than the foliage. Now he leaned forward and pointed with the muzzle of his rifle. There, just discernible in the forest duff, was a thin line of different ground cover. He prodded the surface just beyond the line, and the forest floor collapsed in a fountain of wood chips, decayed roots, and random leaves. The gaping hole stood revealed. Andy Holland waited until she had her heart under control, then looked into what could have been her new home. The pit was a meter square and better than 2 meters deep. Deep enough to cause bodily harm, perhaps not grievous, but certainly some. Knight motioned Horg up to his position. While Holland was examining the pit and the way around it, Emmerdine had sensed something else. He pointed into the foliage on the left and indicated what he wanted Horg to do. The man nodded, then moved off into the darkness, silent as a shadow. Knight tapped Holland on the back and communicated that she should remain still. Without obviously pointing, he indicated where she should watch. Holland settled back on her heels and searched the green gloom ahead. Swollen Horg, squat and solid, drifted into the leaves. He waited while the motion caused by his departure from the patrol's trail became still. When he couldn't hear anything but the sounds of the forest, he moved on. Knight had indicated a target some 10 meters ahead. Horg was to flank the position and attempt to come in from the rear. He had done such a drill 100 times, probably even more than that. Continuing to creep away from the troll until he was clear, he then turned to parallel the route. After 20 meters, he turned again. Unconsciously counting steps, he reached a position ahead of the patrol. He turned again and began to creep silently, slowly, toward the unseen target. He lifted each foot high in the air, balancing his weight on the grounded foot. With the toe pointed down, he slowly lowered the foot until it made contact with the soft soil. Ever so slowly, he lowered the foot until it was down, feeling through the sole of his boot for any stick, leaf, or void that might reveal his position. Once the ground was confirmed as safe, he slowly shifted his weight to the new foot and repeated the process. It was an infinitely slow way to travel through the woods, but it was a noiseless one. Ahead, Org saw a darkening in the surrounding undergrowth. He froze, hardly daring to breathe. It was a giant, feathered figure. With the same infinite care he raised the laser rifle. Org didn't want to shoot the thing in the back. That was against all the training they'd been given in preparation for the mission. He tapped the side of the rifle, just enough to attract the attention of the figure. The reaction was spectacular. As Horg watched, the figure rose to its full 1.5-meter height. It was a ball on a pair of long, skinny legs. It spun to face him, revealing a long, ovoid body with 2 huge eyes centered over a short beak. The animal shrieked an almost human scream. It leaped backward in surprise, almost as great as Horg's own. He too stumbled back, but recovered quickly and brought the laser rifle to his shoulder. The alien pressed back into the suddenly unyielding brush. The shriek continued. Horg fully depressed the trigger until all the slack was out, and the detent of the trigger sear was fully engaged. If the thing moved, Horg would blow a hole through its hairy body. Of that, he was quite sure. The alien gave another shriek, but this one was more than a cry of terror. It was a warbled wail that rattled and clucked. Horg held his fire. The cry came again, more muted now, more intelligible. "Please, no shoot," it seemed to say. "Please, shoot not." Horg relaxed the tension on the trigger. Not all the way, but just enough to keep the weapon from going off by chance. He listened more carefully. "Please, not shoot, do. I, your friend, want to be." The figure whimpered softly and raised its hands to cover its eyes.